Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babyar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker. My guest today is Darcy Murphy, who works with CCO and also gets to do a little partnering and working with a friend of the podcast from the past named Andrew Neubauer. We've had Andrew on before and probably have him again in the future. But a while back, Andrew and I were talking about just a handful of different topics and things that are related to the podcast and raising support. And he actually suggested that I invite you onto the podcast, Darcy. So first of all, welcome. I'm glad you could be with us today.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm honored to be here, and big shoes to fill following up Andrew. But he's great, and he's spoken highly of chatting with you. So I'm looking forward to this.
Well, it's good to have you. And I think our listeners will probably be quite interested in our topic of the day. But before we step into that, I'd love to get to know you just a little bit more. Of course, you and I have never met before. This actually is our first conversation. And so we are both shooting from the hip here. But hey, God's grace, right? God's grace. But tell us about yourself and a little bit about who you are and where you find yourself in the world.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I'm working, as you said, with CCO. I'm a full-time campus missionary at the University of Victoria. So here on Canada's west coast on beautiful Vancouver Island, just north of Seattle. It's a gorgeous place to live and to do ministry. And this is my first year of full-time ministry here. I was previously a student in Ottawa, Canada's capital, and had grown up in Ontario prior to that. And
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot of different places where I know there's an NHL team. So where do your allegiances lie?
Yeah, well, I'm loyal to the Toronto Maple Leafs. I suppose I'm ready and willing to embrace suffering. So it's fitting. Over 50 years now, waiting for a Stanley Cup. So long before my time.
Well, but the Senators always had one of the coolest jerseys, I thought, but they weren't a whole lot better. So and now you're in Canuck land. So I guess you just kind of got to deal with all of it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But
well, I'm glad that you could join us to discuss the support raising virtually.
Mm-hmm.
Darcy, I'm not sure about your interaction with SRS or for how long you've been involved with raising support, but there was a time, even less than a year ago, as far as when we're recording, when I would have told someone, don't do it. Don't try and raise your support virtually. It's impersonal. People think you don't care. They can't connect. I'd rather you get on an airplane. And to a degree, I still think it's better face to face, with proper health, markers and things like that. And yet, sounds as if you're one of the people that you didn't really get the opportunity to make that choice for the most part, because did you do the bulk of your support raising after the pandemic kicked in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I raised my entire salary. After the pandemic. It was May 2020 where I began. That time preparing to jump into full-time ministry. And so it was all post-pandemic. It was all through a lockdown.
Wow.
Stay-at-home orders and what have you. So it was all online.
And that in the past, I think, was far more of a position, not just myself or Steve Shadrack or Support Raising Solutions or CCO or what have you, primarily because it seems as if there is something lost in the virtual space. It's just, it's less personal. It can be less dynamic. It can be less interactive. Now I said can. That doesn't mean it is always. I still prefer face-to-face. In fact, I wish you and I were sitting across the table with microphones in front of us, but we're not. And yet that doesn't mean it's impossible. And clearly you have a story to tell. But I want to just illustrate how, just briefly, how this has changed, because the purpose behind avoiding virtual in the past wasn't because it was impossible per se, but it's because of the concern for it being impersonal, for it being less
Mm,
connected, for it not being something that might be very effective. And yet the times dictated that you stepped in, or at least mid-pandemic. We don't know how long necessarily is going to last or not,
mm.
but so tell us about your experience and how you realize, wow, I got to do a lot of this over Zoom, or well, I tell you what, why don't you tell us what you did and how you did it?
Mhm. Well, I mean, the interesting thing was at the time that I discerned my call into ministry and was hired, it was pre-pandemic. So I didn't know what I was signing up for really. And then,
Mm-hmm.
the domino effect happened after I'd signed my contract, but before I found out my placement actually. And so I was preparing for a cross country move and getting ready for SRS boot camp and to begin that time this summer, as the pandemic was beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so there was concerns, there was fears on my end, on the end of CCO, and how they were going to prepare us. We thought, might this get delayed? Is the pandemic only going to affect us for 2 weeks and we just bump things, or is it going to be a 2 month thing or a 2 year thing? We didn't know. We still
Mm-hmm.
don't know. Um,
Right.
so eventually, it was decided we're going to carry on. We're going to um, do what we can via Zoom, FaceTime, whatever it is, to be able to connect. And we knew that God wasn't limited. I was part of a class of missionaries that were hired that, you know, we needed to get out there in the field. We needed to raise our support, and um, we knew it
Mm.
was still possible. So.
Yeah. Well, I admire that, but I also want to say you knew it was still possible. But also, I'm going to say to a certain degree you didn't, because
Mm,
I was inundated very early on in March. In fact, I was already getting messages from people when I was not quite back to the States yet, when I was experiencing a meltdown and in a different country. And I was getting comments and questions like, well, I guess I can't really support, right, because I can't do it face to
mm,
face. And I was even hearing from people that train and coach others who were calling me and saying, "Hey, is this actually possible?" Or I was hearing people say it's not possible. You just can't raise support. You have to wait until after the pandemic is over. And so that was in March and April. And there was a handful of people going, "Hey, you know what? God is still very much on His throne, and He knew this was going to happen. And people are going online more, and maybe instead of saying this is impossible, we need to trust God for this and step into it and kind of figure out what it looks like." And so
mm,
sounds as if that was you were one of the first, I guess, classes, one of the first
mhm,
generations, if not the first generation, that was like, well, if being faithful and answering God's call to step into ministry means that I need to raise support virtually, then I guess that's what I'm just gonna have to do. So, how many
mhm,
how many people did you know personally, from your boot camp that were stepping into that in such a unique time?
mhm. I think there are about 15 of us starting together. Yeah. So a small class by our standards in CCO, but still enough that I wasn't alone. So that was
Yeah,
a reassurance. Yeah.
yeah, that's great. That's great.
Hmm.
So tell us about the process a little bit. Tell us about what you learned, and perhaps even some scriptures that God brought to mind as you were pioneering into raising your full support virtually.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I mean, in terms of the process, one thing that surprised me was, of course, there's a lot of things that we can look at and we can easily say, as you mentioned, Aaron, this is maybe a disadvantage. This process, it's less personal because it's over a screen. We can't have coffee together. We can't, share a meal. You can't show me pictures of your children, in your living room before we talk about my ministry. Things that I would have ordinarily expected in a meeting, but there were certain advantages as well. In one sense, there were a lot of people who became really comfortable with um, using platforms like Zoom, platforms like FaceTime. So they were actually more ready to connect. People were picking up the phone much faster because they were home alone. They were lonely. I expected I would have to make, maybe 3 times as many phone calls as I would have ordinarily. But I found people were picking up right away.
Mm,
So there were some advantages there, and the way that the Lord was speaking to me in the Word, it was that verse from Matthew where he says, "To all those who have, more will be given; they'll have an abundance." Matthew 25:29, and it was this sense that okay, Jesus is calling me into the mission. He's already given me so much. And actually, I was inundated with his providence. It was almost this sense that this is going better than I ever could have asked for or imagined. Um, and so that was reassuring, but it wasn't without challenges either. Did you hear any stories like that too? I mean, I feel like I received so much, but I know for not everyone would it have been, I guess,
yeah,
going
yeah,
so well.
yeah. So I have a theory. Now, this is not a scientific fact, and so people shouldn't read too much into this. But I actually think that it's quite possible that the people that had said, "I can't raise support right now. It's never going to work. I'm not going to do it," um, might have actually missed out on one of the better times to get a hold of people.
Hmm.
I can't be certain of this. I have a sense that perhaps it's waning a bit, but certainly for the first 6 months or so of the pandemic, there was people more like glad to talk to someone, glad somebody reached out to them, glad to talk about something that had eternal significance.
Hmm.
And so, if anything, it's possible that it might have been even more strategic in some ways for that like little period of time to try and reach out and connect with people. Um, that being said, I don't want to defer people away and go, oh, well, I missed the window. I can't raise support now.
Hmm.
I wouldn't want anybody to derive that. But I think perhaps those that were pioneering enough, like yourself, to just go, you know what? God is in this. And
Hmm.
it is possible to connect with people virtually, even though it's not ideal, it's possible. And I'm just going to take steps of faith. And yeah, certainly you still run into those people that, they're going to duck your call and they don't want to talk to you. And like that's going to happen in any walk of
Hmm.
life, any day of life, any time of year, pandemic, no pandemic, like that's going to happen. Right.
Hmm.
But, but yeah, I heard from a lot of people that were saying, wow, but it takes less phone calls to get a hold of people. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, Jen Fortner, who has a great blog, jenfortner.com, JENN, jenfortner.com, she actually, I think, was telling me, or perhaps I read it on one of her blog posts, that people were finding that the phone was being answered 2 to 3 times quicker than
Hmm.
what's normal. At least in the early days of the pandemic.
Hmm.
I don't know if that's still true or not. Again, I don't have any research behind that, but um, I do think that your faithfulness and your willingness to step into the call that God led you to, Darcy, even though in some ways it sounds like and felt like the world was breaking. Uh, God,
Yeah.
God honored that. God
Hmm.
very much honored that. So what do you recall as far as like feeling during that time? Because it sounds like, I mean, I'm just guessing here based off what you said before, but it sounds like you did the bulk of your support raising probably in June or July.
Yeah, the bulk would have been the end of May and in June.
Okay.
Most of it was wrapping up in July. Um, like another testament to his goodness that in all of this I was able to reach my target early, and so did half of my class, which is remarkable. Like that stuff doesn't happen, but God is real and He does that. So, but what was I feeling in that time? There were still fears there that I think like transcend any time. There was the concern, all these people, have lost their jobs or, they've lost a loved one. who's been sick and died because of the pandemic, or
Yeah.
they can't visit with their family, and so there was the insecurity there that here I come, not knocking at their door, but um, calling their phone, and it's still an ask that we have to make of them, but trusting in the God ask that the Lord has prepared hearts to give. Um, and so that was a concern, but I think it was overcome for sure by the emphasis. It was neat actually that Andrew. He was coaching me through the summer, um, and that Andrew really challenged me to place an emphasis on in every meeting sharing the gospel.
Hmm.
That was a non-negotiable, that we're sharing
Hmm.
the gospel in every meeting, and um, that really overtook the this any scarcity mindset that was there. And instead, it made it exciting because I knew I was sharing the gospel with people who were more open than ever before to hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And even the testimony to how your class seemed to move quicker in some ways. There is something very unifying. First of all, just following the Lord, whether others around us do or not. But when we are in a small group, a cohort,
Mm-hmm.
there's something about that momentum of, hey, we're doing this together, but really we're doing this individually for God's glory. That is,
Mm-hmm.
it's very powerful, and I imagine it was really encouraging for you to know that there were other brothers and sisters that were also endeavoring. Because hey, guess what? Even in time of pandemic, when people are answering the phone, support raising not easy, is it?
No, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Yeah, yeah. So there was challenging, but having that brotherhood, sisters as well in the mission who are there with me
Yeah,
going
yeah.
through it. I mean, it's funny you said cohort. Like we have a group chat for all the missionaries in my class, and we're called the COVID cohort. Because that's right when we started. Was
Yeah.
May was our start, and but there's another group chat, and it was a smaller group of us that connected a few times for support in our support raising. We call
Right.
ourselves the scaredy cats because there's still fear. There's still fear to reach out, especially in COVID.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I think we were really rejoicing because we found ourselves, yeah, all ahead of target. Um, and so it was, yeah, it's the Lord that was showing His strength
Mm,
um,
praise
to
God.
us, no matter how scared we were. So
Praise God.
yeah, He's good.
Well, at the time we're recording this, it's still fairly early 2021. COVID, of course, is still very much around. In fact, my family's dealt with it this past week. Praise the Lord, we're all doing okay. It's been about a week.
Mhm.
I think we're all through the worst of the symptoms. But we're actually still, yeah, we still got to stay home for a few days. I've lost my
Mm,
taste, praying that comes back. So we're despite our best intentions and efforts and stuff like that, it still affected us. But
my goodness.
within that, um, I still do the work that I'm called to do for the kingdom of God, and I still have to figure out how to manage and deal with COVID on a macro sense as I'm doing ministry, and even as we talk about raising support. And so I say all that, and perhaps that's a little bit too personal for some people, but I don't shy away from just saying, hey,
Mm,
I'm honest and fallible, and I can get sick too. And I did. I got
mm,
COVID. It's too bad. Praise the Lord, though, that we haven't had any major things like that in our family,
mm,
because, man, we've had our fair share of other health stuff. But what can a ministry worker, Darcy, what can a ministry worker expect about raising support online that might be
mhm.
different than raising support in person? And I'm going to ask you this from two different points of view, and you can answer it as best you can. If you want to answer
Okay.
individually or put it together, either way is fine with me. But what about the person that is just getting started? They haven't really raised support before. Perhaps they've gone through an SRS boot camp, which we definitely recommend, but they're pretty new to this. So what can they expect? And then also for the veteran, for the person that maybe has lived out support for a while, and maybe they did all the face to face stuff before, and now they're realizing, well, I can face to face, but it's going to be over FaceTime. So Yeah. What are some expectations that people who need to dip into actual support raising? What are they out looking at?
Mhm. Yeah, well, for the new support raiser, um, I would say, what they can expect really is something very similar to what they would have heard in their boot camp and in their training and through the experience of their coach, or any other fellow support raisers they know, is that we're still being faithful to the same process. You know,
Hmm.
we're still asking the Lord to provide for us. We're still seeking out the names He's inspiring us with. We're still making the phone calls. We're still setting up the meetings. We're still um, presenting our ministry vision and making a clear ask
Hmm.
for support. And people will still say yes. The Lord will still provide. Um, and so that can be, in that sense, an encouragement to that new support raiser, that it's not going to be really that different um, from what you've already said yes to, or what you're gearing up for, or what you've heard about. Um, and to the veteran, to the experienced support raiser, maybe to flip that on its head, in a way, it is very different, and there's a lot of advantages. Um, Something I had some experience with was knowing other CCO missionaries who had support raised in person, and one difference I saw was we can be far more efficient with our time when we're support raising virtually. You don't have to drive to appointments. You don't have to hop on an airplane. Um, and frankly, in a meeting, we really do have to fight for that personal connection. But people are far more ready to get down to business, if you will. If you're scheduling a Zoom call, people know that they're actually, even if you've set it up well on the phone previously, they're prepared. They know that you're calling, and that you have a presentation to share, and they're happy to get to it, and to talk about what you've planned to talk about. Um, it, and it can save you some time, really. And so, what I would encourage really a veteran support raiser to do is to fight for that personal connection. You know, when you're setting up the meeting, and when you sit down on Zoom at the beginning, you ask the couple that you're meeting with, go into your kitchen and make yourself a cup of coffee. Let's sit down together and have coffee, and we'll chat for 10 minutes. And then I'll begin my presentation. You have to kind of go against the grain, but it's a little bit different than, going to Granny's house, and uh, she makes tea for you, and you're sitting there for 4 hours chatting and petting her cat. And then you finally, pull out your binder. Um, there you're finding that happy medium when you're online. So um, to the veteran support raiser, know that it's the same connection. When you're meeting in person, it might be a 4 hour visit before you even get a chance to pull out your binder,
Oh, yeah.
um,
Yeah. Okay.
which is
Okay.
a beautiful connection. But we do know there's an urgency, and so the online support raising can be much more efficient with our time and with our resources.
Yeah. You know, it. There are some people that when you sit down with them online, you're going to get their full attention. But my
Mm-hmm.
warning, and I don't have an answer for this. I wish I did. I've thought about it a lot, and I've thought about 7 points that you could do, and I don't want to get into all that. But my one concern is if somebody is already so used to being online all the time that they don't like they don't really give you their attention.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in a men's Bible study, and they're good, godly men, and it's great and all that. But also, I know there are times when we're not doing Bible study and we're just doing catch up, and you can
Mm-hmm.
tell certain people. I won't name names, but certain people actually they're checking email, right? Like they're sitting there looking through other stuff, and so it would be wise for you to really. Yeah, if you are going to meet with somebody online, be prepared to really try and connect and ask them
Mm-hmm.
questions, engage, and have a visual or two. People don't want to watch a 15-minute presentation; they really don't. But maybe a few visuals, maybe even a short video or something to kind of pull people in. But anyway, yeah, you had great thoughts there. So, what about
Yeah.
new contacts or strangers? Is that still true? Like, if you let's say you get referred to somebody, there's a referral. Um, can you get a referral? Are they even open to meeting with you online in your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, referrals felt, like, well, naturally like a godsend to me last summer.
Hmm.
Um, and there's one story that comes to mind where I called a friend here on the West Coast that I had met twice in my life, at a couple of conferences a few years ago. And I called him and I asked for referrals, and he gave me 10 or 15 phone numbers. And you make a couple of calls and a few people don't pick up, but I think of those direct referrals, a third of them became supporters, and one of the referrals passed on another three or four more referrals that turned into new support as well.
Amen.
Um,
Very cool.
and these are strangers that I had never met before, but as a testament to God's providence, they became supporters, still having never met them, um,
At least not
just
face to
by way of
face.
a phone call.
Wow.
Um,
Wow. And so there's an opportunity in there, though, for people that are fully funded and, you need to raise a little bit more support, or maybe you're just not sure how to reconnect with your supporters. I
mhm,
would say set up a Zoom call. Like, just do it.
mhm,
Just like set up multiple FaceTime, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, whatever it is that you use. And if there is ever a time to go, well, it'd be really hard to travel back to Seattle and meet with my supporters. I don't have time to do that. Yeah, but if you have five supporters in Seattle, um, maybe they'd be willing to Zoom with you just to say hello, just to update
yeah,
them on the ministry. And so, in that way, especially our brothers and sisters that are very, very displaced from their support team, there has never been a more strategic time where financial supporters have the ability and even the willingness to jump on a 20 or 30-minute call just to pray with you and hear an update on the ministry, or perhaps
mhm,
even be invited to increase their support if there's a need. So there
mhm.
really is a from referrals or people that you don't know very well to besties, that we are in a unique time where people are more open to meeting online, aren't we?
Absolutely, I'm glad you mentioned that, Aaron. That's actually something that I've taken on this year with I've called it my anchor team, um, a selection of supporters, couples, and individuals who, yeah, are clearly bought into the mission and united in prayer in what I'm doing. It's a group of about 8 or 10, and 3 times in the semester I've had Zoom calls with them, and these are all people who are a 5 hour flight and 3 time zones over from me, but that I'm able to connect with for that 45-minute call, share an update on how ministry is going, pray together, and they've been really blessed by it. I
Hmm.
know that because they've shared that with me, and I've been blessed by it too. I need their prayers to to grow in endurance here in ministry,
Yeah.
and that just would not have been possible. These are people that I would only see maybe once every year or every other year otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Well, as we go to wrap up our time today, I want to just ask you, just from a faith standpoint, how did God grow your faith, or perhaps even the faith of your ministry partners, like outside of the finances? Because I realize that people listen to
Mhm.
this podcast usually because they need money. I mean,
Mhm.
that's what brought them
Yeah,
here, and
yeah,
that's not a bad thing to need money. Of course, we don't want money to be like an idol in any way, shape, or form, and we definitely think people need to, read the book and read the scripture and go through a boot camp and have a support raising coach. Oh my goodness, people need coaches after they go through a boot camp.
yes.
But all that being said, how did God grow your faith during this time, or maybe even something from one of your ministry partners that you've learned over during this time of raising support during the pandemic?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I really believe that, well, Jesus is the multiplier, right? And so he takes something and he makes it better. He makes it more. And so he already took what seemed like a perceived improbability. Okay, young university student graduate decides to leave his job prospects, move across the country and enter full-time ministry. It's already an inspiring story, right? It's
Yeah.
already something where I'm maybe going to doubt that God is going to make it worthwhile. And then he proves me wrong and it's awesome. And my supporters and friends see that. But instead of a perceived improbability, he took a perceived impossibility. Oh, and you're going to do that during a global pandemic. You're going to move across the country and find an apartment and raise a salary. And the word that was really standing out to me through the summer was in 2 Kings. It says, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you, O Lord, are God alone. It skyrocketed my faith to see that, okay, now I can't rest on my laurels. This is too crazy for it to have been my work. It's too crazy to say, oh, I was, savvy in the meetings and faithful to the phone calls. No, the Lord had to intervene to make it work in the way that he did. And people saw that. Even stepping into ministry in a time where so many people are hurting, there's a crisis of mental health. There's, a crisis of young people struggling with school and unemployment and relational crisis. The Lord made it that much greater of a glory story, I think. And so my faith has skyrocketed to know that he did what was already difficult and made it crazier. And people have seen that too.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, praise the Lord. And I'm thankful for just your time today, just sharing with us, because I realized that it wasn't that long ago, but to me, it seems really short ago, where I was not that long ago. I mean, it just seems like it was like last month where people were saying, oh, you can't raise support right now. You can't do it. It's not possible. And you're not the first person that I've heard that God just totally blessed their socks off and it was more than possible. But I appreciate you just taking the time and sharing more about your story with other people out there that are going to more than likely need to do a chunk of their support raising, maybe even all of it, through using technology and through video and phone calls and virtually and stuff like that. So, Darcy, thank you very much for your time today, and thank you for being a guest on the SRS podcast.
Aaron, it's been a pleasure, and I'm excited to hear of the glory that the Lord brings about. As the challenges continue, but that He's bringing out great glory and revealing His goodness through this. And so I'm appreciative of the opportunity and praying for your family as well, and health and restoration there.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisingsolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.